Over the years, I've been asked countless times why I don't like to, why other veterans, we just don't talk about war all that much. We don't talk about not just war, but more specifically, we don't talk about our service a lot. I've been asked to explain this by a couple of my service buddies. I've been asked by countless people who didn't serve that have asked me why I'm so tight lipped about certain things and why 90% of the time the only time I'll talk about is with other vets, and why a bunch of people like their granddad or their father or some other guy they know just won't talk about it at all. And there's also certain things that they just can't get out of people, or why some vets just don't tell people that they're vets. There's This video is definitely gonna clue some of my friends in who watch my videos into that, who just I've known for years and I just haven't bothered telling because there's no point. Um Anyways, that's a terrible intro. I'm bad at those, but kind of explaining why I'm making this and I'm finally folding to peer pressure. But I've also kind of caved because I think I've got a really good visual way to explain this to the layperson, to just the average man, woman out there that is trying to figure out why they can't get this out of someone that is close to them, and they're like, why won't they talk about it? Now, granted, it's not all of us. Not everyone gets out and it's just like, yeah, well, I'm done with that. Um, for a lot of reasons. First of all, for a lot of us, that's the only thing we can think about. Even 4 years later, for me, the only thing that goes through my brain is fucking what I went through. I can't get that shit out. That's not good. But a lot of people can't get it out of their brain. A lot of people also, that's the only cool thing they've ever done in their life, or that's the coolest thing they think they regret getting out, or they just genuinely had a really good time, which is rare. But some people are quite vocal about it and will post on social media all the time, or you'll hear them talking about it constantly. They'll make it part of their like identity, and I mean it is part of all of our identities, but some of us just don't show it, and there's a lot of us that fall into the we don't show it, we don't talk about it, we're very reserved with that, and we just don't let a lot of stuff out. So I'm going to try to explain here why. So here you have this orange dot here. This represents how long you're in the military, your entire career, your time in service. Whether you did 1 3 year contract and got out, or you did 20 years and retired, or more, or anything in between, this is what this represents. This is your time in service. Now, there's three things that are going to take up your time in service that are going to keep you from talking about them. This first thing here, this black dot, this represents the things that you do not want to talk about. Now, whether that be more or less, it's gonna matter on the career, but usually this is like trauma stuff, or something that was traumatizing to you, or something that was embarrassing, that or something that made you and your buddies look bad. So you just don't want to tell people. It's like, yeah, I fucked this thing up, or I wasn't the best soldier, or I saw some really horrific shit in Iraq. That's what this black circle is. It's going to take up a decent chunk. It's usually not going to be most. It's usually going to be on the lower end, but it's going to take up a chunk of your time in service. So that's everything that's no longer orange is stuff you won't talk about. So you're left with all of this. Now, the next two are going to be these giant gray blobs here that we're going to bring in. And they represent the stuff that you think nobody wants to hear about. Nobody wants to hear how you PMCS'd 8 strikers last Tuesday. No one wants to hear about how you had to do extra duty, or you got yelled at, so you had to fucking sweep the desert back and forth for 6 hours because you didn't use the correct rank or terminology talking to somebody, or you couldn't remember exactly how far your rifle fired. No one wants to hear about that because, or all the maintenance you did, or how much you did a lot of, you know, cleaning. People just don't care, right? Not only do people not care, but you don't care about it. You're not that invested. This Nobody joins the military because they want to use a broom a lot. It's not, or mop hallways endlessly. Nobody wants to do that. So it's just not interesting, and nobody cares. The storyteller doesn't care. The person who served, they don't care. The fucking person who's hearing the story, their civilian friend, doesn't care. If you have two veterans talking, sometimes they'll talk about this, but they usually won't. So that also takes up a significant portion. That's going to be the vast majority of your service is these two gray blobs. They're just this is the boring stuff. That is reality of the military. There's a lot of boring stuff, and that leaves a very small portion of orange down here. Now, here we have the stuff you're not allowed to talk about. Now, in reality, some people will make you think it's like this, but in reality, it's usually like this sort of stuff. It's going to be very small. It's going to be the smallest part of your service. And the vast majority of the time, if someone says that's classified, 99.9% of the time when they say that, that is bullshit. That's just not what happens. This should probably be more like here for most careers. And most of the time, it's not like, oh, you're on a secret mission or something. It's like, usually, this sort of stuff is, oh, you had access to, like, the arms room. And they don't want you giving out the fucking code to get into the arms room. Or they don't want you, explaining how certain hardware works to foreign militaries. So that's classified, right? So yeah, I mean, if you're like working on a fucking F-35, then yeah, your job's very classified. But that's not because you're out there going on secret missions. It's because you're working on a state of the art piece of hardware that you just can't tell people about, right? Because you'll get in trouble because you don't want to let leak how certain things are, right? How you do things. You don't want people to other militaries to find that out, right? Very few of the time it's because you're doing like secret squirrel shit, which is, you doing something, like special forcey. Very few, very small amount of the time you're actually doing that. So now, the vast majority of this orange circle is covered in stuff you don't want to talk about, a small amount of stuff you can't talk about, and a bunch of stuff of that just is boring and no one wants to hear because it's just why. You're going to have a little bit of overlap between all of these, and stuff you can't talk about and no one wants to hear about is like something where you were doing something fucked up and makes you look bad, or something like that you don't want to talk about. It's also gonna overlap with this if you did something illegal. Um, but they also don't want to hear some really horrific shit, like that time you had to get in a firefight with kids in Iraq. You don't want to talk about that. No one wants to hear about that. That's just not reality. Nobody like that's gonna gray out and black out and blue out a bunch of the orange. So now you're left with this little sliver of stuff that people want to hear about, you're allowed to talk about, that you are okay with talking about. However, the problem is that all of this is going to be related, all the orange is going to be related to the black, blue, and gray. It's going to be interconnected because you're still doing the same job. So then it becomes very difficult to talk to people about the stuff that happened in orange without them asking about stuff that happened in black, without you having to explain the stuff that happened in gray to get to the stuff that happened in orange, without you having to kill the story and be boring, or leave intentional parts out that make the story make no fucking sense because few times you're not allowed to talk about it, like how to fill radios. I'm pretty sure that you're not supposed to tell people that. Or fucking how you're like something you did that was fucked up, you know, while during the fucking orange bit, right? So now you've got stuff that everything is fucked because everything bleeds into each other. So how do you talk about the stuff in the orange? Well, simple. Even if you're like me and you have it on your brain a lot, so you talk about it with other vets all the time. When you're talking about the stuff in orange with other vets, they understand the stuff in gray, and they also understand why you aren't going into the blue or the black. So they are very capable of staying in the orange and not venturing outside of that. When you're talking to someone that never served, they don't understand that there's a lot of stuff you don't want to talk about, some stuff you can't talk about, and a huge amount of stuff that is just boring to hear. So they think all of this is orange. They think the whole thing's orange, but it's not. They think it's all something cool to talk about, but it's just it's not. So when you're trying to talk to them about something that happened that you're willing to talk about, that you're allowed to talk about and isn't boring, it's not going to make a lot of sense because you were leaving so much out. So much context just isn't going to be there. So much context is going to be missing. So you just don't. It's a lot simpler to only talk to other vets about your service than to try to stay in the orange around civilians, around people that have no idea, that just never served, that it's just not a concept to them that they can understand that there are these other places that you don't want to go for whatever reason. If you go south, fucking, well, that's a bad way to put it, but if you go down into the blue or the black, you have to stop, right? You don't want to. But if you try to explain the orange by going up into the gray, the person you're talking to most of the time just checks out because you're talking boring shit. I hope that explains it, and I hope that I wasn't talking too many circles at the end here. But basically, the conclusion is that it's hard to talk about the orange without talking about the blue, black, and gray. So it's usually just not worth it to talk about the orange. It's just usually more mentally taxing or boring than it needs to be, and you just want to get on with whatever you're doing. And, you've got other interests at that point. So why focus on something that you're so limited in talking about? It just personally doesn't make sense. And for me and a lot of guys I know, that's the block. That's why we don't talk to other people a lot. Um, they didn't serve. That's why there's just a disconnect. Isn't obviously going to go for everyone, but generally this is the pattern I've seen. So yeah, I don't know. I guess this is the end of this. Bye.